What's up, folks? So today we're going to be talking about Red Rising. This is a book that I've heard quite a bit about over the past year as I've been getting into BookTube and reading more often. It's been recommended to me many times. In fact, there's a guy at jiu-jitsu that I train with. We were both reading 𝑀𝒊𝒎𝒂𝒏 at the same time over the past year. As I was reading 𝑀𝒊𝒎𝒏 with him, he kept recommending Red Rising. He was like, dude, you got to take a break and read Red Rising. It's going to be a great palate cleanser. You're really going to enjoy it. I just know that you're going to have a good time with this book. I even recommended The Will of the Many to him. He went off and read that, and then he came back to me and he was like, dude, that book was good, but you got to read Red Rising. And I was like, okay. I kept putting it off over and over again, but this past holiday, I had room for like one more book before the end of the year, and I figured, why don't I try Red Rising? My friend keeps recommending it. I feel like I should do him a solid and finish this book before the end of the year. So that's what I did. I picked it up over the holiday, and I just blazed through this book. I'm going to give some quick spoiler-free thoughts here, but essentially I would just totally recommend Red Rising if you haven't read it before. If you're into science fiction or fantasy even, because I don't know, I find the crossover between science fiction and fantasy, at least for me, I know there's a big difference, but it's all about using your imagination to put you in a world that doesn't currently exist. And I, for one, totally fell in love with the world that Red Rising takes place in. Not because it's an amazing world, but because it's a great setting for an incredible story. So I would just totally recommend that you read this book. It's a story of revenge. It's a story of a young boy becoming a man. It's a rite of passage. It's about trying to do the right thing. It's definitely about making difficult decisions for the greater good. Poses some interesting moral questions. Not that I think this book isn't necessarily where I would go to like get my philosophy from or to stimulate that kind of intellectual thinking per se. Though those questions could be posed if you were going to have a discussion about this book. But at the end of the day, the story's just damn good. The writing's damn good. The dialogue's good. The characters are good. Yeah, I just had a freaking great time with this book. And overall, I would just give this book a 4 out of 5. It's very good. With so many things that I enjoyed about it. It just never really hit that peak that requires a 5 out of 5 for me. And I think that's probably because it just didn't have that intellectually stimulating portion that I sometimes enjoy in my fantasy or science fiction books. Like, I just didn't quite get to that level with this. But I had so much fun reading it. So definitely 4 out of 5 for me. And it's something that I would just definitely recommend to anybody who's a fan of science fiction or fantasy. With that being said, let's hop into a quick discussion of some spoilers. I have some things that I liked and some things that I disliked, and I just kind of want to walk you all through them. That being said, if you don't want to hear any spoilers about Red Rising, now's the time to click off the video, go read the damn book. It's fucking amazing. And yeah, let's start with the spoilers. Boom. So let's start off talking about the beginning of the book, right? Darrow is still in the mines with the rest of the low reds underneath the surface of Mars. This is the part of the book that I didn't necessarily vibe with the most. There was something about this introduction that wasn't quite sucking me in. It was good. I could see how we were setting the stage and like building the stakes. Darrow lives an incredibly miserable life. The whole world is against him and the rest of these Reds. It's just a miserable existence. And obviously the way it's set up, it's like they're trying to mine this helium, what the fuck is it called? Helium-3? Yes, they're mining helium-3 as a fuel source to terraform Mars. And so it's framed in a way where they're doing something for the greater good. And I can see, like, you know, what Pierce Brown is setting up, trying to make me feel sympathetic with Darrow and his family. But it was like, I wasn't sure. I wasn't, like, bought on everything hook, line, and sinker just yet. Especially, there was just one thing that I couldn't get over the fact of is that Darrow and his wife, Io, were 16, and particularly his wife. His wife was, like, making some statements and some decisions that I just didn't quite understand how a 16-year-old would make those decisions. I understand they're in this, like, dystopian world and that given the circumstances, you might be making more mature decisions based on your life experience, I should say. But it just didn't quite sell it for me. I don't know, I couldn't picture a 16-year-old, like, being so radically dedicated to the cause that she would sacrifice her own life in that way just to inspire Darrow to make the move that he ended up making. And so that was the point in the book where I was like, I don't know. I don't know if it was selling me. But I will say, when Darrow is saved by Dancer and Harmony from the son of Ares, after he's supposedly hung and escapes, he's brought by Dancer and Harmony into this kind of elevator complex, which brings him up to the surface, and he gets to see the surface for the first time. Just the way that scene was all written out and done, the reveal of the fact that, oh my god, there's this whole civilization on the surface of Mars we've been lied to this whole time. The reveal of that was incredible and totally bought me into the story. I was like, all right, that was worth the entire, first few chapters of this book. I am now bought in hook, line, and sinker. It was very well done and totally put me over the edge, I would say. So then you have the whole sequence of Darrow being educated by the sons of Ares and also being genetically and physically modified to become a gold, right? I thought this whole sequence was good and entertaining, and it kind of exposes you to the world outside of the mines and the Institute, which is where we spend most of our time in this book. So it was nice to get some background on the overall world on Mars and the city that he was living in at this period of time. I wish there was almost a little bit more of that. It could have been too much though, like it could have slowed down the pacing of the book, but I was almost wanted a little bit more. And maybe that's a good thing because that makes me interested to see what's going to be revealed in the books to come. We were getting tiny glimpses of what the city was like, and I just wanted a little bit more, I would say. But I thought that whole sequence was really interesting, the way his body was physically changed. I like the name of the plastic surgeon or doctor who was physically modifying him. I liked that guy was called a carver. I like that there was emphasis on the fact that he had to become smarter and more educated. That was going to be just as important as becoming physically stronger. I certainly wish that I could read and consume information in the way that they do in this book. That would be very helpful. But anyway, like I said, we don't really spend much time in this portion of the book. So let's just move on to the meat of the story, which takes place at the Institute. Like I said, there was a couple moments in time where I felt like this book just really stepped it up and brought me further enraptured into it. And the passage was definitely one of those moments, right? So all these young gold candidates go to the Institute. They get sorted into their different houses, very Harry Potter-esque in a science fiction sort of way. And then that night, I think they have a meal, and then they all get sent to bed, and then they're all captured, and they're all essentially kidnapped in the middle of the night. They're all then brought to the real Institute, which is essentially this giant battlefield. For some reason in this mind, it reminded me of the Halo map Blood Gulch. If you have any experience playing Halo, you know what the map Blood Gulch is. But I basically pictured this whole thing as just a larger version of that, where there's a giant valley and man-made ecosystem that has these different fortresses for each house scattered across the valley, and the students are essentially placed in each one of these castles and fortresses. But when they arrive at these fortresses, they are all thrown into cells with one other member of their house, right? The proctor, I believe that's what it's called, the proctor comes by to each cell and just essentially throws like one ring from the house into the cell and says to the students, hey, we can only take one of you. Somebody's going to come out of this cell alive, and that's who's going to be a member of the house. You can only come out if you've killed the other student, essentially. I don't know why, the book had been pretty brutal up until this point in time, but I wasn't expecting that, I will say. I was like, that's what's going to happen here? Obviously, our main character, Darrow, has to kill his cellmate. It just, I don't know. It just upped the stakes immediately, made me more invested, more excited about the book. Incredibly brutal moment. Don't know if I would be able to do that. Yeah, just really upped the stakes and made me want to see what was going to happen next. And then, of course, Darrow exits the cell victorious and meets up with all the rest of the other students from the House of Mars. And it turns out that Darrow had killed the brother of Cassius, who ends up being one of the other top people in the House of Mars that Darrow has to befriend. And so it's just great drama, great intrigue for the story. There's just this underlying tension now for a majority of the story where Cassius doesn't know that Darrow's killed his brother, but Cassius and Darrow are slowly becoming tighter and closer friends. And you're just wondering, okay, when is this going to be revealed and how it's going to go down when Cassius finally figures this out? Now, I don't want to get into every single detail. There's so many things I enjoyed about this sequence at the Institute. which is really just the remainder of the book at this point. Essentially Darrow has to fight his way to being the number one individual in the house, and then also his house has to win this whole competition of the Institute by either eliminating the other houses, by killing the members of them, or enslaving them and making them part of his house, right? It's basically just a giant, brutal version of Capture the Flag. Yeah, just like really intense version of Capture the Flag with, possible death on the line. One thing that I wish had happened, or unsure, I wasn't sure why it didn't happen, is that we never got any more information about the Sons of Ares in this book that had sent Darrow into the Institute. That felt a little strange, only because that was this whole sequence of the book at the beginning that kind of gave Darrow the reason to do what he was currently doing. And I understand, logically, they couldn't risk trying to get in contact with him. But considering how the proctors acted throughout the second half of the book, and especially the last quarter of the book, where they're very much involved with the students and taking an active role in trying to decide the outcome of the Institute, I thought for sure that at some point in time, one of the proctors would reveal themselves as having some sort of Son of Ares connection. That never really came about. There was that moment with Titus where it was alluded to the fact that he was a Son of Ares, that Darrow noticed that he might be one of them as well. So that kind of gives you a hint that the Sons of Ares have maybe a bigger scheme going on than he was originally led on to believe. But it wasn't so I was like, okay, let's go a little bit farther with that. What other information, is there to explore about Titus and his Son of Ares connection? It just kind of gets wrapped up super quick at that point when Darrow kills him, right? Or when Darrow has Cassius kill him, rather. So yeah, once the Institute really gets going, it just doesn't stop. The action keeps moving. There's just constant backstabbing and plot twists and explosive action and strategic planning. Just so many different things to keep you interested during this whole Institute sequence. And I think part of that is because, I was mentioning that I wanted more of the world building aspect in this book, that I felt like it was missing a little bit. But the fact that the book is so contained to the Institute and this man-made environment, I think that's what allows it to move so quickly. Is because once you get settled into the environment here, we never really have to, rebuild the world again for the reader. Pierce Brown can just pretty much rely exclusively on the action, the dialogue, to move the plot forward at that point. He doesn't have to go, oh, this is that new city we're in, this is the new place, or we're traveling to this place for this reason. There's none of that in this book. A lot of the fantasy books I've been reading recently, it's okay, the characters are going on a quest somewhere, and there's a lot of walking and camping and talking and walking and camping and talking. And that can be fun for a little bit, but it does get quite repetitive. So I think that is what's nice about the school trope, is that once you get used to the school environment that you're in, it becomes much quicker for the author to push the reader through the plot. And I'm just kind of realizing that as I'm talking out loud now. So I think that is definitely a big part of why this book feels like it moves very quickly and is very fun to read. One thing I really liked about this section of the book, I'm only going to mention a couple more things because I don't want to go on and on about all the different plot twists, but I really enjoyed that Darrow kind of gets kicked out of the House of Mars at a certain point in time. I believe that this is when Antonia betrays him, and then Cassius finds out that he killed Julian and comes after him. So Darrow gets kicked out of the house and then has to be taken care of by Mustang, and they kind of have this romantic interest that starts to build, and then Darrow has to slowly build his way back up and his following back up so that he can kind of make another push to be the Andromedas of the Institute again. It's just another layer of struggle for him to break through that, again, built the stakes in the book. I thought the introduction of the Jackal character into the book made things a lot of fun. Clearly the Jackal is built up to be this incredibly brutal, smart, capable student, who then of course turns out to be the son of the arch-governor himself, and is clearly being favored by all the proctors in the competition of the Institute, right? All the proctors are trying to help this kid win so that they can, accomplish their own various goals outside of the Institute. It gives Darrow a really good enemy to put himself up against. the final boss of the Institute, if you will. But of course, he's able to outsmart him. I thought the scene where he kind of catches him off guard in the House of Jupiter, I thought that was a super clever scene. But then it just kind of like, right as you feel like the book is hitting a peak, it just keeps on escalating. And then you have Darrow and the Howlers assault on Mount Olympus, where the Proctors are all camped out. And the book just kind of like, I was at this point, I was just, okay, let's just finish this whole book tonight. I was just reading, nonstop. Yeah, I thought the sequence where they're kind of raiding Mount Olympus was great. It was kind of fun to have that whole inmates taking over the prison trope going on, where like the students are finally like, they're seeing beyond the fourth wall and seeing all of the stuff that's being used to control them over the course of the past few months. And then right up until the end, you're doubting what's going to happen. Like, it seems like everything has been going in the perfect direction for Darrow. Like, he's set up to finally have, to win everything. But then you find out that Mustang is the twin of the Jackal. And you're like, wait, what? There's been some allusions to the connection in the book. Like, I definitely knew that something was coming in regards to that. Like, there was no way that Mustang could get out of this book scot-free without some sort of suspicion. So there was always something in the back of my mind like, all right, what's going to come out about her that is going to like drive a wedge between Darrow and Mustang? But I was not expecting that, definitely. So damn, like another just really good plot twist right at the last second. And I was like, oh shit, what's going to go down? But I liked that it went well for Darrow at the end there. Like, I was like, okay, finally, a win. Something that went the correct direction and gave him the win that we've been rooting for the entire book. And then at that point, you realize, like, oh, this is just the beginning of a very long quest for Darrow, right? Like, he just made it through, this is the introductory phase of this whole series. So, yeah, I can't wait to read book 2. All of my friends who have read book 2 say it's even better than the first book. Super optimistic about that. If it's as good as they say it's going to be, I'm sure it'll be a 5 out of 5 for me. I'll probably be reading that in the next couple weeks, I think, as soon as I finish the Joe Abercrombie book that I'm reading now. And yeah, I feel like that I just kind of touched on most of what I wanted to talk about in this book. Like I said, this is just a damn good story. Just a really awesome banger of a story about vengeance, becoming a man, rite of passage, friendship, honor, integrity, and having a lack of those attributes also, and how you have to deal with those kind of people in life. Like I said, there wasn't some giant philosophical overarching lesson per se in this book, but that didn't really matter to me. It was just a damn good time. And yeah, I very much recommend it. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoy the content that I'm doing on the channel, please like the video and subscribe. And there's plenty more book content on the way. I have a bunch of books that I haven't done reviews for just yet, so those are coming. I also have some Malazan content coming that's not necessarily review related, but is more on the philosophical side, so I think that should be interesting to see how it's received on the channel once that comes out. So yeah, keep an eye out for that, and I hope to see everybody in the next video.